Alright, so in this video I just want to go through and kind of finish up our discussion about structure. So in the first video in this series we talked about the overall look of the book of Proverbs. And so in this one I just want to give a quick overview of the types of Proverbs that you may run into. Now this is not, I'm going to give you the three main categories, right? So I guess there's a few others here and there that maybe could be classified differently. I think whenever you run into something that's classified differently, typically it's because it might be more of a psalm than a proverb. So there are some sections that we talked about, remember, kind of towards the beginning of Proverbs that really tend to fall more in line with a psalm. And their structure follows that method more so even than they do Proverbs. But it's in the book of Proverbs, so you tend to read it and just assume it is a proverb because of the title of the book, right? But in reality, those first few ones are more like Psalms. But let me just show you this chart here. If you look at this left-hand column, it gives you the three main types of parallelism, right? So parallel, think of parallel bars in the Olympics, or something that's parallel. They run side by side, right? So that's the image here with the Proverbs, is that typically you have two lines of text, right? And then the second line has a specific relationship to the first line, and the relationship is not the same, right? So this is important if you're going to teach a proverb and teach out of this book. You have to understand what is the relationship between the first line and the second line, right? Because it's not the same throughout the entire book. And so when you're meditating and praying about how you're going to teach from this, or if you just want to understand it for yourself, the first question you need to ask, above and beyond understanding just the words of it, is what is the relationship of this particular parallelism, right? So if you notice, like the parts that Solomon wrote, they're almost exclusively Proverbs. That entire main section that are Solomon's Proverbs, right, all tend to follow this same basic style here. And so when you're reading through them, it's important to establish what is the relationship between the first and the second one to help you to understand the point, right? Because if you get that kind of backwards, then maybe you get a point that wasn't intended, right? So we'll go through them. There's three. There's synonymous, there's antithetic, and there's synthetic, right? So the first one's synonymous. That's repetition, right? So basically the idea is it's kind of like the first line is going to say something, and then the second line is going to say the same thing, just in a different way, right? So we can look at the example that they have here on this chart is to know wisdom and instruction, to discern the sayings of understanding. So those two are trying to say the same thing, right? So when you read through that, a lot of times when you're looking at the synonymous parallelism, the revelation is in the unique way that the second line says the same thing as the first line. And so there's some wisdom in that he's saying the same thing but using two different sentences. And so kind of when you compare the two, a lot of times you get a revelation because you can see that the first one and the second one, they're after the same goal, but how he words it the second time, there's often a catch there. There's often some kind of revelation in how he worded it the second time. All right. And then we can just read their description. They said the first line makes a statement of truth, and the second line restates and reinforces the principle given in the first clause. But so it's not just, though, that the second line repeats the first line, that there is a uniqueness to the second line, and that there's something there in how it repeated the first line, right? So I think, like in that, just that example in number 2, in the Proverbs 1:2, that he's calling it wisdom and instruction, and then in the second line he calls it the sayings of understanding. And so right off the beginning, it almost seems like what he's saying is that the sayings of understanding are really a combination of wisdom and instruction. And so it's how he words it. So when he says that, it's almost like what he's trying to show here is that what genuine understanding is when you have wisdom and instruction, right? Because instruction teaches you what to do. Wisdom is almost like why you should be doing it, right? And so understanding is when somebody knows not just why they should do it, but what they should do. Like you could have wisdom and know and be really wise, but then maybe lack the skill, right? Or some of the instruction parts. So anyways, it almost seems like one revelation you could get out of that is that in the first line he combines wisdom and instruction. In the second line we know is saying the same thing as the first line, but he only uses one word, which is understanding. And so it's almost like he's saying that true understanding is a combination of wisdom and instruction. Alright, second one is antithetic. So this is when the second line is, I don't want to say opposite, but when it gives a kind of contrasting kind of, it's not fully opposite, but it is kind of a contrasting kind of thing. And so we'll read their example and kind of work through it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So it's not necessarily the opposite, but it is giving you a truth of what the other side of this kind of looks like, and so it, in their description here, they call it opposite, but something can be antithetic and not necessarily opposite, right? And so in this one, he's saying the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And in the second line, fools despise wisdom and instruction, right? So they're giving you, on the one hand, how to be knowledgeable and how to have, get on the path of wisdom, right? And then the other one explains what the foolish person does, right? And so you got two ends of the spectrum here, and so it's antithetic, right? It's contrastive. I think contrastive, the word they have there, contrastive, is better than opposite, because when you read through these things, they're not all opposite. Sometimes they're just showing a contrast between two thoughts, right? And that's still the antithetic approach, right? And so the wisdom is in understanding how they oppose each other, these two thoughts, and looking at them in contrast. So the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, right? And then fools despise wisdom and instruction, right? So there's more than just being opposite here. It's talking, the fear of the Lord is almost not found at all down there in that second line, right? So the opposite would be, no fear of the Lord, right? And so, maybe that's something that you could infer from this, even though it's not necessarily stated, but, you might be able to infer something like that he's saying fools despise wisdom and instruction. And so because it's contrasting, you would look at that and say, okay, that first line has something about the fear of the Lord, the second line doesn't. So you could almost imply from that then that they're saying a foolish person has no fear of the Lord, right? So you kind of go back through and look at those. It says fools despise wisdom and instruction, which would mean then, if you're taking a contrasting point of view, then that somebody that is wise seeks out these things and cherishes wisdom and instruction, right? And then the third one is synthetic, right? So the idea of synthetic and how it's different than synonymous. Synonymous is trying to restate the exact same thing, whereas synthetic is trying to build on the first thought with kind of a new thought, right? And so they're headed in the same direction, right? So they're not contrastive like the antithetic. These are headed in the same direction, but the second line is designed to build on the first line, right? So let's look at their example. The Lord has made everything for its own purpose, even the wicked for the day of evil. Right? So the principle here is that everything has a purpose, right? That everything that God created has a purpose. But the wisdom is that He's showing you the part you might not have thought of, is that even the wicked serve a purpose, right? Because when you first read that, the Lord has made everything for its purpose. It sounds positive and uplifting that we all have our role to play, but then the wisdom in it is that, hey, it's not just the good things, right? It is everything, even the wicked stuff. God still uses for His ultimate purpose, right? Okay, so just wanted to quickly go through that because this will help you in your studies of the Proverbs, is to be able to have a kind of a command of these, right? You don't see this structure. It's scattered throughout the Bible in other places, particularly some of the prophets and things, but for the most part, this structure is found only in the wisdom literature, particularly in the book of Proverbs. Okay.